This sample will be for the elastic shirring. So for this one, you're gonna use your 3/8 inch seam block. We're just gonna cut one layer of that. And then we're going to gather this up. So I'm gonna do a vertical line of elastic gathering, and we're gonna do a 2-to-1 ratio. So essentially our fabric right now is twice the length that we want it to be once it gets gathered up. So I'm gonna cut my elastic half the length of my rectangle. My full rectangle is 8 3/4. So I'm gonna do 4 3/8. I'm going to do it with my clear elastic. This can also be done with the braided 1/4 inch elastic that is a solid color. But I like to do it with the clear elastic because it's nice to have the see-through aspect, and you'll see why in just a little while. So I'm gonna do 4 3/8, but I'm also going to leave a little bit on either end, about 3/4 inch on either end, for me to hold on to, because we're gonna be pulling on this and stretching it. So there's 4 3/8. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this a little longer, but I will mark where my 4 3/8 hits so that I'm doing that measurement properly. So mark on my elastic right there, and then my 4 3/8 right here. Okay, so I've got a little bit extra on either end to pull on whenever I get started. Okay, the next thing we need to do is take our fabric and turn to the wrong side, and we're going to draw a straight line right down the center of our sample. And this is going to be our guide for us to stitch on, so that we don't get our elastic off center as we stitch. Okay, the next thing I need to do is divide both of these in quarters and mark it. So on my fabric, I'm using my disappearing ink. On my elastic, that disappearing ink usually doesn't work, so I'm just gonna use a regular ballpoint pen. But I'm going to fold that in half. And mark it. And then fold each of those sections in half. So I'm dividing it into quarters. Okay, same thing with my fabric. Excuse me. Okay, now I'm ready to head to my machine and start stitching. Okay, so I'm at my machine ready to start stitching. I've got my standard foot and I am on a zigzag stitch. I'm gonna line up that first marking with the edge of the fabric. Get that under my foot, and the center of my elastic is in line with that vertical line we drew. Now I'm just gonna get this started with a stitch or two of zigzag, and then I'm going to pull out my needle and thread and grab some extra thread, or let some extra thread come out, grab that and pull it to the back. Okay. And what that does is it gives you a little handle so that as we're stitching this, we're going to have a grip on our fabric in the front and the back. So as I'm starting, I don't have any fabric to grip in the back. So now that I just did that little thread thing, I have a thread handle back here. Okay, so I'm going to stretch out my elastic to where that first quadrant is fully stretched. Hold on to my threads at the back. Do those couple of, yeah, my stitches started to come out, so they weren't anchored in there. Okay, so now that we've got them anchored again, I'm just doing a zigzag stitch right down the center of that elastic. Okay, and then when you get to the point where you have fabric at the back, you can go ahead and hold on to your fabric instead of your threads. And just guide that through the machine. And I'm stretching a quadrant at a time. Okay, so now we've got that gathered up. So that gathers it on both sides of the stitching. So you could potentially do that horizontally for a waistline where there was no seam. There we go. Or you could do this vertically if you just want to add some texture, maybe to a skirt or something like that, where it picks up in a portion of the skirt. You can also do this technique right on the edge of your fabric to gather up maybe a skirt portion before it attaches to the bodice. So you would do this right on the edge. It would gather up that skirt of your dress, and then you would go ahead and serge it to the bodice of your dress to have those gathers in the skirt. So this can be used a couple different ways. So I'll just go clean this up and get it ready for submission. Okay, so to get this ready, I just need to trim off those threads and that excess elastic that we had on the end on both sides. And then there's really no pressing to do because we don't want to press our gathers out. So just clean it up. You can kind of lay it as flat as possible, and that's how I would take my images.